Before we get started, I'd like to make a quick apology. If you'll hear any noticeable clicking in the background, for some reason recently my PC's been acting up, so it's making some really loud and weird noises. So I apologize if you overhear it and it makes it kind of difficult to hear me. What do you know about these ruins up there near the slow line? They must come from the Age of Legends. Asmodean did not even glance up at the mountain. This world is very changed from the world I went to sleep in. He sounded weary, and he shivered slightly. What I know of what lies here, I have learned since waking. The mournful sounds of the march of death rose from his heart. That could be what is left of the city where I was born, for all I know. Shirel was a port. This interaction we see here between Rand and Asmodean the Forsaken takes place in Book 5 of Robert Jordan's popular Wheel of Time series, titled The Fires of Heaven. Here, the audience is treated to an interaction where they're looking at they're crossing through the mountains, coming back into the mainland after being in the desert for an entire book, and they're looking, and they see up in the tops of the mountains a massive ruin that, according to Asmodean, could have been a great port city. However, after the end of the Age of Legends, it got shoved to the top of a mountain hundreds of miles of inland. Throughout the genre of literature, audiences have always been fascinated with the prospects of either utopian or dystopian societies. I mean, I even fall victim to that. Some of my favorite books are dystopian or utopian. In many of these novels, there is a very, very strong correlation with many utopian societies that eventually you could see that they're designed to collapse and set the stage for either a dystopian world or a just setting the foundations for world building. I mean, what we're going to look at focusing here is how the Age of Legends utopian society was designed with the sole purpose of collapsing in on itself to create Robert Jordan's world. We see in multiple studies, as conducted by Ho in 1986 and Sands in 2018, and several others that also kind of correlate with this point, saying how that utopians societies, while many of them are still built only to serve as the utopian, several of which are designed so they could build their dystopias or world building. For those of for those of you who are unfamiliar with the world of Wheel of Time, I strongly encourage you to read the books. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give a bastardized short summary of the Age of Legends and the breaking of the world. Thousands of years prior to the events of the Eye of the World, which is the first book in the series, and which unfortunately is where the TV show that Amazon created picks up, the world of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time lived in a period known as the Age of Legends. This time frame saw many features of not only utopian societies, but arguably solar punk, themes of solar punk. There is no form of discrimination, of at least that I could tell from reading the books and reading some of the backgrounds to it. Their pollution is negligible to minor. There's not even any damages to the environment from when it comes to extracting resources. We'll get to how they do that in a little bit. Um, there's a large source of green renewable energy, and with going back to the fact that there's almost no crime, it's because they actually kind of introduced the means of proper criminal justice and criminal justice reform into society. However, in this age, not everything was as squeaky clean. There was kind of a form of tiered system with getting your names. For the most part, people would only have one, like like a first name, and that was it. Or depending on the role that they played in society, they could get two names. And if you were really up there, you could theoretically get a third name attached to your name, which, in a sense, that could lead to some form of social discrepancy because those with more names might be prone to getting higher, like a higher social standing. Um, and then, but the main thing is the implementation of magic in this world. In the world of the Wheel of Time, there are magic users known as Aes Sedai, which in the main series were only female. However, in the Age of Legends, they were both male and female. Um, and these magic users, upon finding out, they were trying to match this thing called the True Source, which was divided into two parts: the male half, which is Sidene, and the female half, which is Sidar. And that this magic source was used to create these massive cities, this energy source, and other just absolutely masterful pieces of art, literature, and architecture. Um, However, at one point, the in search of a new, because they had apparently had found a new source of energy. They thought they had found a new source of energy, so they started to bore their way towards it because it was buried. And what happened is that they had accidentally bored themselves into their version of the devil, the Dark One's prison. And what followed was a absolutely brutal war that ended in a victory for the forces of light, which, I mean, it's fantasy, so usually you're going to see the light triumph over the dark. However, it came with a very bitter cost. In order to achieve this victory, the entire male half of the true source had become tainted by the Dark One, which led to the maddening of the male Aes Sedai. Um, and after this event, for hundreds of years afterwards, the male Aes Sedai went mad, and in a feat of their magical power, destroyed everything, shifted continents, uh, burned the world, pretty much torched the world. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, imagine the scene at the end of the show with Ozai going on the balloon at the end of the series, setting fire to everything in its path. It was something kind of like that, but on a much more massive scale, with tectonic forces just being thrown out the window. And for the people in Ogiers who somehow managed to survive this event were left to pick up the pieces, which laid the foundations for many of the countries that we see in the narrative for the Wheel of Time. Now that the summary's out of the way, for clarification, we can look into it, take the concepts from the Age of Legends, and apply them to some of the notions that we see, um, and how utopias fall. Sorry about this. Uh, when when I read for doing research, when I was reading Ho's dissertation, one line stood out above the rest that helps highlight the overall concepts that are behind the creation of utopian societies. Quote: Utopia is intimately linked with myths, especially the myth of the Golden Age and the Garden of Eden. Utopia is an applied fantasy distinguished from the pure fantasy of fairyland, but not really separable from it. End quote. This is inherently true because when evaluating examples of utopian literature, while we could see that there are large chunks of it that are grounded in reality, um, upon further examination of the framework, each of these utopian societies have some form of fantastical uh, backgrounds to them. Again, when applying this to the Age of Legends, while we see great cities that are that Jordan takes aspects from our great society from modern society and applies them to his world building. However, this world could not achieve this utopia without without having magic, which I guess by this means you wouldn't be considering this solar punk because it doesn't have any of the resources at the available. However, it is still a really good example of a utopia that has applied some aspects of solar punk into it. Um, like I was saying, because a lot of the stuff in this book series, in this aid period, are grounded in reality. There are with the magic only applied to a few features. For instance, one of the major cities in the Age of Legends. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it was home to this massive university, and above the city, there is a huge sphere just floating above the city, held up by magic. With this, without that sphere there, this were without the sphere and magic, this could arguably be the framework for a future semi-futuristic solar punk novel, because when you're looking at the Age of Legends, again, I can't emphasize this enough. There are points where you can see that this might be our world that we're looking at. And then Sans kind of emphasizes, you can see that. He's talking about how it's a commentary for our world. Um, and then, so the literal translation of utopia is referred to as no place, which kind of means it's a non-existent society that's described in great detail, which we see in countless examples of literature, with Wheel of Time, Utopia, and several of the solar punk stories that we have explored throughout this class. Another major concept that these articles detail when in relation to the roots of the word utopia is that there is a relationship between the genres of utopia and dystopia as a whole. Sands writes in his 2018 article that, quote, utopias can describe either a different and better way of being in the world, utopia, or a worse extrapolated from the consequences, or a worse world extrapolated from the consequences of the poor choices being made in the author's timeline, dystopia. Using this, taking this concept and applying it to literature, um, if any reinterpretation of the world that serves as either fantastical world building or commentary for our world should be classified as a subset of the utopian genre. Ho corresponds with this by referring to dystopias as a whole as a general form of satirical utopia. Therefore, novels that are set in dystopias like The Hunger Games and 1984 are just as equal to being utopias as The Age of Legends and The Wheel of Time, or any other novel or form of science fiction / fantasy that is set in a utopian society. The concept of utopian and dystopian worlds is, like, again, I've referred to this probably a couple times already, but I can't mention this enough that it is referred to being providing commentary towards our society. Sands emphasizes that, quote, utopianism encompasses the dreams and daydreams of the individual as well as the formal, fictionalized dream of the complete alternative, end quotes. So, due to Robert Jordan's death, a death, and I think it was 2012. Don't quote me on that. It is it is increasingly difficult as time goes by to truly understand the background for the creation of the Age of Legends utopian society. However, when you're applying the commentary of Sands and Ho, and then tying it into the Wheel of Time, um, like a lot of the concepts that we see with the green energy, living in harmony with the environment, and all these other things that we see, like criminal reform, they share many similarities with both the solar punk genre, which and when you see when they come around, this world was, I think the first books came out in the '90s, which is right around the time that solar punk was starting to get its roots really into the mainstream and then dispersing it. So, and then when you're looking at this, and then so and then comparing it to the Wheel of Time, we can see that it serves as a commentary for this period serves as a commentary for our world. Um, throughout the books, artifacts that were recovered from the Age of Legends bear resemblances to features of today's society. There were there were planes, cars, and features in particular. There's brand actual symbols of modern brands that we see. I think when they're I don't remember the exact scene, and finding it is going to be really difficult because these are thousands and thousands of pages. But one of the artifacts from the Age of Legends is is four connected circles, very similar in description to the symbol of the Audis, which makes sense because it's cars. And then without a well, another problem with this Age of Legends is that there was no canonical maps for this world. So the fan bases of these books pitched in to try to create this world, and the general consensus is the world of the Age of Legends bears starking resemblances to our world. The continents are very similarly shaped, if not more water, and many of these major cities are located where many of our major cities are located. So I guess the general consensus with the fan base of the Wheel of Time is that the Age of Legends is kind of serves as a social commentary for what we want to see in our world. However, with the breaking of the world, it kind of proves that it's also serving as commentary for corruption and the corruption of man, and leading it to the downfall of society, which, to be fair, we do see in our world today. Well, I've gone on a long time about how I really enjoy the Wheel of Times, Age of Legends, and how utopias are used strategically to help serve as world building when they collapse. It just makes one major actually, like, I do understand that in many instances a collapse of utopia is good for entertainment values. I mean, if you're living in a squeaky clean world, there's not really that much to it that's entertaining. I mean, again, that's like a lot of the critique with some of the solar, for some people who are not familiar with solar punk or utopians, is that like it's too boring. There's nothing really in it. Um, I just what I don't understand with this creating a utopian society only for it to fall, and you only mention it briefly, is that why go through so much effort to build a utopian society only to have it collapse? And just like, because I've seen it done poorly where it just doesn't work. Like it just doesn't make sense. If it was truly a utopian society, why did it fail? Like, why does it fail? I mean, for the Wheel of Time, there was a reason, and it was because the Dark One was reaching his fingers from his from the prison that the creator gave him, and he was like leeching his fingers out, and it hooked into some of the minds of some of the more powerful Aes Sedai, which I could see that one happening. But for some of these, I don't understand how their utopias collapsed. Like again, it just doesn't make sense. Like if I were to change the Wheel of Time and still incorporate the Age of Legends to make it more suited, why not have a major empire? Like, why not just have like a massive empire, and then it collapses and it collapses for some because of something, and it serves as a commentary for maybe past civilizations. I mean, we see it in the book series already with the empire of Artur Hawkwing. After the breaking of the world, he had conquered vast swaths of land and just created this absolutely massive empire, only for it to collapse in an almost as equal disaster as the breaking of the world, known as I think it was the Trolloc Wars, or he just died and his empire collapsed, kind of like Alexander's empire in our world. So then it goes. This all serves as the point. If a world was set into a dystopian society, if a world set in a dystopian society that came from the ashes of utopia, was this world truly a utopia? I mean, it's. I mean, I acknowledge that there's the argument for utopia for who, but for many of these, they were well built utopias that anybody could fit in. So it just doesn't make sense that if you're going to go through all this effort to create a utopia, why do it? Because if you're only going to make it collapse in on itself. In conclusion, the Age of Legends and Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time serve not only as a possible peek into a solar punk world, but it absolutely is a good example of a utopian society and one of its main functions that we see in science fiction and fantasy, with how utopian societies are many times created just to collapse in on itself. Um, we can see through some of the notes, lots of the community discussions of the Wheel of Time, and applying it to concepts that we see in today's world. We do see that this world was built to serve as a commentary for our world, and what if that we're not careful of what we could be destined for. Again, for those, there are critiques to this world. It is far from perfect, but I do not find the critique of the Age of Legends and for utopian societies collapsing. I don't find it damning. Like many of these worlds, really they do a really good job of drawing in audiences to these works. So I can't blame them. Why differ from the course when it's proven to work? I will wrap this up by saying again, for those who are really interested into getting into the Wheel of Time, but don't want to read long into the series, because it is a very long series. And for my first read through of the books, it took me two and a half years to read this entire book series my first time. And I want to reread the series, but I don't have the time to do it. However, there is a way to get around this. I strongly encourage you to read The Eye of the World. Um, The Eye of the World it's still a long book, but if you were going to only read one book in the series, don't read the prequel first. You read this book because it serves as its own. It could serve as its own standalone fantasy novel because it has its own entire storyline that's not it's related to the rest of the book series while at the same time not being related into the series. Um, so, yeah, it's a good book for those who are really interested, for anybody who really enjoys fantasy, but doesn't want to spend a lot of time reading thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. Um, Thank you for spending about half an hour listening to me blabber about the Wheel of Time and its utopian society, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.